When you picture ancient Rome, you've probably got this image in your head, right? Massive arenas, unstoppable armies, emperors in togas. But what if I told you there was a secret ingredient behind almost all of Rome's greatest hits? Today, we're going to uncover the hidden connection that helped build one of the most powerful empires the world has ever seen.
So let's just ask the big question. What made ancient Rome so, well, Roman? We have this idea of the Romans as these brilliant inventors who just created everything from scratch. Their laws, their buildings, their whole culture, it all feels so unique. But was it? Really?
Here's the spoiler. Nope. A lot of it wasn't. It turns out many of Rome's most famous ideas were actually borrowed or maybe inspired by their powerful and really sophisticated neighbors to the north, the Etruscans. For a long time, the Etruscans were the major power in Italy, and you can bet the early Romans were taking notes.
All right, so how do you build a superpower? You got to start from the ground up. Literally. The actual blueprint for the city of Rome, its engineering, its architecture, was heavily influenced by Etruscan designs.
Let's start with a piece of technology that is an absolute game changer, the arch. Before this, if you wanted to build an opening, you just put a flat beam across two posts. Simple, sure, but it really limited how big or heavy your buildings could be. The Etruscans, though, were the first people in Italy to truly master the arch, this amazing curved design that could support a ridiculous amount of weight. The way it works is just brilliant. Instead of all the weight pushing straight down and breaking the beam, those wedge-shaped stones push the force outwards and down into the ground. When the Romans saw this, it was a total light bulb moment. They realized this would let them build gigantic structures, things like their famous aqueducts and the Colosseum, that were just impossible before. And it wasn't just the arch. The Romans basically adopted an entire city-building toolkit from the Etruscans. They learned how to build huge stone walls for defense, how to lay out their streets in an organized grid, and they even borrowed the Etruscan style of columns called Tuscan columns. They were a little simpler than the fancy Greek ones, but they were super strong. One of the most important Etruscan projects in Rome was the Cloaca Maxima, which translates to the greatest sewer. See, the place where Rome was founded was super swampy and low-lying. This thing was basically a massive drain that channeled all the water away, which allowed the Romans to finally build their famous public square, the Forum, on dry, stable land. And here's the part that is just mind-blowing. The Romans eventually covered that drain, turning it into a huge underground sewer system. Today, something like 2,600 years later, parts of that ancient sewer are still functioning under the modern city of Rome. That is just incredible next-level engineering.
Okay, but the Etruscan influence went way beyond just buildings. It actually shaped the very core of Roman identity, their ideas, their customs, the whole shebang.
Let's take something you use every single day, the alphabet. The Romans didn't invent theirs. It was kind of like a game of pass it on. Greek traders gave their alphabet to the Etruscans. The Etruscans changed it around to fit their language. Then the Romans borrowed that version and tweaked it again to create the Latin alphabet, which is the ancestor of the one we use in English today.
Now let's talk fashion. Think of the most iconic piece of Roman clothing ever. The toga, right? We see it everywhere. That big draped piece of cloth was the ultimate symbol that you were a true Roman citizen. But you know where this is going. Where did that famous look come from?
Yep. It actually evolved from a short, purple cloak worn by Etruscan kings and high officials. The Romans saw this garment as a symbol of power and status, and they adopted it, turning it into their own formal wear. It was an instant visual that just screamed, "I am Roman."
Okay, another huge part of Roman life was their relationship with their gods. They believed the gods were always sending signs, and that you had to understand those signs before making any big moves. So the question is, how did they think they could do that? To figure it out, they took up a very specific Etruscan religious practice. They used these specially trained priests called haruspices, who believed they could read signs from the gods. And they did this by examining the internal organs, especially the liver, of a sacrificed animal. Now, this wasn't some fringe belief. This became an official part of the Roman state. You didn't make a big political decision or go into a major battle without consulting them first.
Which brings us to our next section, the symbols of power. Because it wasn't enough to build a powerful city, the Etruscans also taught the Romans how to look and act like a superpower on the world stage. Think about the Roman triumph. This was a massive, citywide parade to celebrate a general after a huge military victory.
It was the highest honor a Roman could receive, and this entire spectacular tradition copied directly from Etruscan celebrations for their own war heroes.
And the details are just amazing. The victorious general would literally paint his face red to look like the clay statues of the Etruscan gods. He'd wear a purple and gold robe, a style taken right from Etruscan kings. The whole show was designed to project absolute power, using a visual language they learned from their neighbors.
Here's another really important symbol, the fasces. This was a bundle of rods with an axe blade tied up in the middle. It was an Etruscan symbol of a ruler's power. In Rome, it was carried by a magistrate's bodyguards to show that he had the authority to punish people, even with the death penalty. It was an unmistakable symbol of government power, introduced to Rome by its early Etruscan kings.
And finally, we have to talk about entertainment. What's the first thing you think of? Chariot racing and gladiators, right? Well, those heart-pounding, brutal games actually started out as serious Etruscan funeral rituals. They were athletic contests held to honor a powerful person who had died. The Romans took this tradition and just supersized it into massive public entertainment for everyone. So when you pull all these threads together, you start to see this huge Etruscan legacy. It's almost like they were the shadow behind the Roman Empire. You couldn't always see them, but they were there, shaping its every move.
Let's just break it down one last time. In engineering, you get the arch, which leads to the Colosseum. In culture, their alphabet becomes Latin and their religion becomes part of the Roman government. In government, their symbols of power are used by Roman leaders for centuries. And in just regular daily life, the toga and gladiatorial games become key parts of being Roman.
I think the main lesson here is that greatness almost never comes from nowhere. Rome became a superpower not because it invented absolutely everything, but because it was a master at seeing a great idea, adapting it, and then scaling it up. They learned so much from the cultures around them, especially the Etruscans.
And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. This pattern of borrowing and blending ideas didn't stop with the Romans. It is happening all around us, all the time. So the next time you eat your favorite food, or listen to a certain kind of music, or even just look at the letters on this screen, ask yourself, what are the secret ingredients here? Whose shoulders are we all standing on today?